Welcome to Hannity tonight. Shocking new allegations that Bill and Hillary Clinton enriched themselves and their foundation in exchange for helping to broker a deal that has turned over 20% of America's uranium supply to Vladimir Putin and the Russians. Now, after Peter Schweizer's soon-to-be-released book, Clinton Exposed, Clinton Cash, will expose several Clinton wrongdoings. Now, the New York Times decided to start digging a little deeper into some of the book's findings. And what the paper found is that in exchange for helping the Russian government buy the company that owns several U.S. uranium mines, key players involved in the deal donated millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation and also paid Bill Clinton a $500,000 speaking fee. The end result is this 2013 Russian newspaper headline, quote, "Russian nuclear energy conquers the world." Earlier today, the Clinton campaign responded to the allegations, releasing a statement that reads in part, quote, "No one has produced a shred of evidence that Hillary Clinton ever took action as Secretary of State in order to support the interests of donors to the Clinton Foundation. To suggest the State Department, under then Secretary Clinton, exerted undue influence in the U.S. government's review of the sale of uranium, one, is utterly baseless." All right, here now to help us unfold a lot more in this Hannity Big Board experience is Ed Henry, who's following the Clinton campaign.
How are you?
Okay, it gets very, very complicated here. Let's go back to 2005. Clinton takes a trip to Kazakhstan.
Right.
On this trip, he's with a guy that is named Gustra, a guy that ends up donating $33.3 million,
yeah, over $30 million to the Clinton
Foundation. And on this trip, right after the trip, they had secured mining rights to 3 specific mines. Explain.
Yeah, and that opened the door to this ownership that is now allowed the Russians to corner the market on uranium here in the United States. The problem I see for Hillary Clinton moving forward is, think about at the beginning of the administration, aides to Clinton, aides to President Obama when she became Secretary of State, signed a memorandum of understanding that there would be no donations from foreign governments, but also that Bill Clinton's speaking engagements would be, at least, there'd be a heads up, some sort of vetting going on. It's very clear when you look at what Josh Earnest was facing at the White House podium today, that they didn't have any answers for the fact that they promised all kinds of transparency and didn't deliver on it.
There was a memorandum of understanding.
Right.
And this came up multiple times in the New York Times article, that they didn't disclose where some of the foundation money came from, in spite of the promise. That's a big deal.
Right.
I would assume they're going to go sideways.
Right. And the reason why it's important is a memorandum of understanding was trying to make sure that there wouldn't be conflicts of interest like this, because, as you say, the key here really is the money going into the foundation and then the action by Hillary Clinton, the fact that she's one of the officials that had to sign off on this deal that allowed the Russians to eventually corner that market. Now, there were other officials involved, and part of what the Clinton campaign is saying is this wasn't her acting unilaterally. This was administration policy. Others signed off on this. But obviously, this is just scratching the surface. A lot more digging is going on.
Well, after they bought, Uranium One ends up buying, what, 4 mines in the in 4 states, mines which account, Ed, for 20% of our uranium production.
Right.
Now, and we don't have enough uranium to run the nuclear power plants we already have in the country.
Right. And the Russians had already stated years earlier how they wanted to get a lot more. And so this was clearly part of Putin's strategy to get more uranium. And so now you see these series of events. What the Clinton campaign statement you read before is they're trying to insist, look, you can't connect all of these dots. And you have to say that the author of the book, Clinton Cash, is saying that he hasn't connected all the dots. He thinks there are a lot of dots there. And the reason why he brought in the New York Times, Fox News, the Washington Post, other news organizations, is to say, OK, here's what I found so far with the donations and certain actions. Can you connect the dots? So that's where she is still not fully exposed yet, because it has not been proven that some law was broken or anything like that.
But we're talking about tens of millions of dollars with people associated with this uranium deal. Right. Now, the Russians own, what, 51% of a company that has 20% of uranium assets in the United States. Right. Now, let's fast forward to 2009 to 2013. They own, at that time, the Russians, 17% of this company.
Right.
They want to make it 51%.
Right.
Now, for that to happen, they need approval.
Right.
Okay.
So then that's where it went through the administration. And what officials tell us is that there are at least 3 different officials who had to sign off on it. The key is one of those officials was the Secretary of State, and Hillary Clinton. That's where she has potential exposure, that there was actual action there. It wasn't just, you know, there's been this talk, for example, real quick, about the Colombian trade deal, and that there was a Colombian oil company that poured a lot of money into the Clinton Foundation, and then Hillary Clinton flipped her position on the Colombian trade deal. Well, what her campaign says is, look, this was a position in favor of the Colombian trade deal. She flipped her position to get in line with President Obama and his administration, right? In the case of this other deal with the Russians, she's an official who, it's not just administration policy, she's making the decision. She's
why, if the Russians have a financial interest of 17%,
right,
of 20% of U.S. uranium assets, according to estimates, when they want to take over 51% of the company, that is something that was signed off on. Now, here's the question. Why would anybody at any point in time ever do that, knowing that uranium could be used? But the importance as it relates to nuclear weapons. Right. And on top of that, the New York Times story did break this point, that while assurances were given that uranium would not leave the U.S., in fact, the yellow cake uranium did leave the U.S. and did make it into Canada, at least Canada.
And you raise an important point, because the story also pointed out that as a senator, Hillary Clinton was very skeptical of these kinds of deals for some of the reasons you just laid out. So look, she's going to have a lot more explaining to do. I've been out on the campaign trail with her. She took 2 or 3 questions the other day in New Hampshire.
2 or 3?
2 or 3. And they were basically...
How many has she taken total, Ed?
More important, 2 or 3 on the trail.
So that's Iowa and New Hampshire?
Right, Iowa and New Hampshire. And the answers were basically, this is a distraction. It was not answering these kinds of questions directly. So look, the bottom line, she had a news conference a couple of months ago to deal with the email situation. That was a real news conference. But then what happened after the news conference? New questions. Where's the server? Where's the over 30,000 emails? So now that's
I know where the server is.
Right.
The server's buried with Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah,
that's my prediction.
Well, so you have that story bubbling, okay? And then now you have this bubbling. She's going to have another news conference pretty soon.
I think you're right. All right, Ed Henry.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, now, as we head over to our desk, joining us now with reaction to this, the legal side of this, and the growing scandal, is the host of Justice with Judge Jeanine Pirro. All right, you got to talk about 20% of our uranium, when we don't really have enough uranium, in the hands of the Russians, and a deal that on so many different levels benefits the Clinton Foundation, Bill Clinton personally, and the fact that this, in her mind, didn't say, send off alarm bells. I need to tell people, is a big problem for me.
Well, you know what? You're saying it didn't send off alarm bells, but it all makes sense to me, Sean.
Why?
Because there was no reporting of a lot of this, as she agreed to, as you and Ed just said, with that memo of understanding with President Obama when she became Secretary of State. She's got to amend her tax returns. She's in a situation where we don't see any of her emails. We can't get the server. Do you think that this is all connected? All this takes, Sean, is a prosecutor like Jim Comey with the FBI to say, we're going to connect the dots here. We've got this intertwining of money to the foundation, money to Bill Clinton, deals with Russia, Canada, Iran is in some of the other deals, and we've got this veil of secrecy from a woman who says that she is the most transparent person and that she is everyday people.
Well,
How can you be everyday people when you're dealing with a case that apparently the Canadian government unearthed $145 million to the Clinton Foundation?
What is the proper description of this? Is this the quintessential pay-to-play scheme, a prima facie case of corruption? Is this quid pro quo? Certainly conflict of interest, influence peddling. What do you want to call it?
You can call it influence peddling. You can call it a shell game. You can call it a conspiracy. You can call it concealment. You can call it tampering with evidence. You can call it whatever you want. But here's the bottom line. Now the email server becomes very relevant, because now the proof is not available unless you've got someone at the other end talking about it. Just like they didn't report a lot of the income to the foundation, just like the MOU was not followed by her, we have to look at Canada and their tax returns to find out how much money was coming in.
Here's the tougher question. Was Hillary Clinton here willing to put our national security at risk for the financial benefit of her foundation and herself and her family?
You know, I can't answer that question, but I have to tell you, it really looks that way. Why are you even engaged in this kind of thing? Why do you even have this foundation? Foundations can take money from foreign governments. Candidates cannot. So what does that tell you? Start a foundation. We'll get money in. We'll wheel and deal all the time. Bill is making $500,000 for a speech involved in this uranium.
Which is more than he usually got.
Which is more than he usually got. But this interconnection between the foundation and their personal wealth and the removal of any kind of transparency is what criminals do.
So we have $2.35 million in one case, and what was it, $30+ million in another
31,
case?
right.
31
million with a promise of 100 to come.
With a promise of 100 to come, and he's at a big event with this guy, and they're raising 16 million in promises that night with 100 to come.
Right. So what you've got is you've got issues at the other end with Kazakhstan, however you Kazakhstan. You've got issues over there with Bill Clinton going over there and saying this president is the greatest thing since sliced bread, when our policy is anti that president. He's anti-human rights, and all of a sudden they agree, the Kazakhstan government agrees to approve the deal that the guy from Canada wants to have to get the uranium.
And politically, she's not informing the Obama administration
anybody.
In spite of a
MOU.
Right. So she's not telling them what she promised them she would do.
Right.
So I would expect at some point the administration is going to be pretty ticked off that she didn't follow the rules on two issues. Number one, the emails, the Records Act, and secondly, on this issue of, where money's coming into the foundation.
She makes Obama look weak. She makes Obama look weak. No kidding.
Right.
But it's going to make him angry, I imagine, when she doesn't follow any of the rules. But here's the bottom line. We always talk about a crime, Sean. Do you really want a president every week where you've got a scandal, where political deviancy is so low that it's like, oh, she's not a criminal, she's morally corrupt?
At this point, we can stop the Russians from having access to 20% of our uranium?
No,
nothing.
You can't. You cannot.
The deal is done.
The genie's out of the bottle. Forget it.
Wow.
The deal is done. The Russians are inside America.
This is beyond chilling. You can't even write a novel like this.
People wouldn't believe it.
They wouldn't believe it. Thank you, Jeanine. Good to see you. Coming up.